Whoopsie and Whopsie!
Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, there was a woodcutter. He lived in a tiny house in a vast forest. He had a wife and 2 children. The older child was a boy named Hansel. Hansel's little sister was named Gretel. The family never had much to eat. Then, one year, the crops failed. There was so little food that even the rats were starving. One night, the man said to his wife, "We sold the cow. We ate up the pig. Now the wheat is almost used up. What is going to happen to us? How will we live? Where will we get food to feed the children when we have none for ourselves?" The man's wife was not the children's real mother. She was their stepmother. She had never cared much for children or wanted any of her own. She found them annoying. "There is only one solution," said the stepmother. "In the morning, we will take the children deep into the woods. We will make a fire. We will give each of them a crust of bread. Then we will leave them there to fend for themselves. They will never find their way home, and we will be rid of them." "No," said the man. "I can't do that. I can't leave my children alone in the woods. The wild beasts might gobble them up." "Then you're a fool," the cruel woman said. "You might as well make coffins for all of us, including yourself, for we shall all starve." The cold-hearted woman kept nagging at her husband. She scolded him. She growled at him. She jabbed him with her finger. She told him he was foolish. She was rude to him in a dozen ways. At last he gave in. "I will do it," he mumbled, "but truly it breaks my heart." Hansel and Gretel were so hungry that they could not sleep. They were awake most of the night, and they could hear the things their stepmother said. Gretel began to cry, but Hansel hugged her. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. "I will think of something." Hansel waited until his father and stepmother were both asleep. Then he got up, grabbed his little coat, and sneaked outside. The moon was shining brightly. The white pebbles that lay in front of the house glittered like silver coins. Hansel bent over and filled his pockets with pebbles. Then he tiptoed back inside. "Go to sleep, little sister," Hansel said. "All will be well." At sunrise, the stepmother came and woke Hansel and Gretel. "Get up, you lazy bones!" she shouted. "We are going to the forest to get some wood." She gave them each a crust of bread. "This is for lunch," she said, "and you had better not lose it, for that is all you are going to get." They set off. Gretel carried both crusts of bread in her apron, since Hansel's pockets were stuffed with pebbles. Hansel knew what his parents were planning to do, but he had a plan. As they walked, Hansel stayed a few steps behind. He took a pebble from his pocket and dropped it on the ground. As they went on, he dropped pebbles behind him to mark the path back home. When they were deep in the forest, the father said, "Gather some firewood, children. I will start a fire so you won't get cold." Hansel and Gretel gathered a few twigs and sticks. Their father started a fire. When the fire was lit, the stepmother said, "Stay by the fire, you two, and don't move. Your father and I have to go and cut wood. When we are finished, we will come back to get you." Then she grabbed her husband by his arm and led him away. Hansel and Gretel sat by the fire. They chewed on their stale bread. After a while, they got drowsy. They closed their eyes and fell asleep. When they awoke, it was dark and they were all alone. The fire had died down. A cold wind blew through the forest. The trees creaked in the wind. An owl hooted. Gretel was scared. She began to cry. Hansel hugged her. "Wait a few minutes until the moon rises," he said. When the moon had risen, Hansel took his little sister by the hand. Then they set off. As they walked, they looked for the pebbles Hansel had dropped. The pebbles glittered like silver coins and showed them the way. They walked on through the night. At last, just at the break of day, they came to their father's house. When the stepmother saw them, she was shocked. She frowned, for they had ruined her plan. But all she said was, "You naughty children, why did you stay so long in the forest? We had begun to think you were never coming back." Their father was glad to see them, for it had broken his heart to leave them alone in the forest. After Hansel and Gretel found their way back, things got a little better. But it was not long until hard times came again. As the children lay awake in bed one night, the stepmother spoke to their father. "There is nothing left to eat but a few bits of bread," she said. "After that is finished, we are done for. We must get rid of the children. This time we will take them so deep in the forest that they will never find their way back." "But wife," he said, "it would be better to share our last few bites of food with the children." The man and his wife fought again. He tried to hold out, but when you have said yes once, it is hard to say no the next time. In the end, he gave in. Hansel and Gretel were able to hear all of this. When their parents were asleep, Hansel got up to collect pebbles, but he could not get out of the house. The stepmother had locked the house up tight. Hansel got back in bed and tried to think of a new plan. The next morning, the stepmother yanked the children out of bed. She gave each of them a little crust of bread. Then they all set off for the woods. As they walked into the woods, Hansel stayed a few steps behind. He broke up the bread in his pocket. From time to time, he threw a bit of it on the ground to mark the path. The cruel stepmother led the children deep into the forest. Hansel and Gretel gathered sticks for a fire. The father lit the fire. The stepmother said, "Stay here, children, and don't move. When you are tired, go to sleep. Your father and I are going to cut wood. When we are finished, we will come and get you." Gretel shared her bread with Hansel since he had left his in little bits along the road. Night came, but no one came to get them. At last, the children fell asleep. When they awoke, it was dark and they were alone. When the moon rose, they started for home. Hansel looked for the bits of bread he had dropped, but they were nowhere to be seen. The crows had eaten them all up. "Come, Gretel," said Hansel. "I know we can find our way." The children set off, looking for the way back. They walked all night. The next day, they walked from morning until the sun went down. But they could not find their way out of the dark woods. They were terribly hungry, for they had eaten nothing but a few blueberries. At last they were so tired that they could drag themselves no farther. They lay down under a tree and fell asleep. Hansel and Gretel awoke in the woods. They were scared and hungry, but they kept moving, always looking for the way home. As they went along, they looked for fruit and nuts and other things to eat, but they found little. About noon, they saw a cuckoo sitting on a branch and singing. The cuckoo sang a beautiful song. Then it flapped its wings in front of the children as if to say, "Follow me." The cuckoo flew up into the air. The children followed it. Hansel and Gretel followed the cuckoo until they came to a wonderful little house. This was no ordinary house. It was a gingerbread house. The walls were made of gingerbread cookies and brownies. The windows were made of candy. All of the parts were glued together with icing. The children were so hungry that they began to eat at once. Hansel broke off a piece of the house and began chewing on it. Gretel grabbed one of the lollipop flowers that grew beside the house. The children sat down to enjoy their food, but while they were eating, a thin, scratchy voice called out from inside the house. "Nibble, nibble like a mouse! Who is munching on my house?" Hansel answered, "It is only the air heaving a sigh. It is only the wind passing by." Then An old woman hobbled out of the house. She was leaning on a crutch. Her hair was gray, her face was all folds and wrinkles. There were only 3 teeth in her mouth, all of them yellow and stained. Hansel and Gretel were so frightened by the old woman that they dropped their food. But the old woman smiled and said, "My dear little children, what brings you here? Are you lost in the forest? Well, never mind, you are safe now. Come inside. I will take good care of you." The old woman took Hansel and Gretel by the hand and led them into her house. The old woman served Hansel and Gretel a wonderful meal. She brought out a tall stack of pancakes. She gave them crisp apples, fresh blueberries, and juicy plums. The children ate all that was set in front of them. After the meal, Hansel and Gretel were drowsy. The old woman showed them 2 little white beds. The children lay down to sleep, feeling as happy as could be. As soon as Hansel and Gretel fell asleep, the old woman came over and looked at them. She said, "They are mine." You see, the old woman seemed kind, but in truth she was a wicked witch. She would trap little children. Then she would cook them and eat them. The next morning, the witch dragged Hansel out of bed and locked him in a cage. Then she went back and woke Gretel. "Get up, lazy bones," she shouted. "Get up and cook something nice for your brother. He is just skin and bones, but we will feed him well. Then when he is nice and fat, I shall eat him." Gretel screamed and cried, but it was no use. She had to do what the cruel witch said. Day after day, she cooked pots of rich food for Hansel, while she herself ate nothing but scraps. Each morning, the wicked witch would creep to the cage to check on Hansel. "Boy," she cackled, "stick out your finger so that I can tell if you are fat and good to cook." But Hansel was clever. He held out a skinny bone instead. The old witch had bad eyes. She could not tell that it was not Hansel's finger. She felt the bone and wondered why her little prisoner was still so thin. "Drat!" said the witch with a frown. "He ought to be plump and ready to eat, but he is just as puny and thin as ever." 5 weeks passed. Each day Gretel cooked and Hansel ate. Each day the witch ordered Hansel to stick out his finger, and each day he stuck out the bone instead. At last the witch decided that she could wait no longer. "Run and get the kettle," she snarled at Gretel. "Be he fat or thin, I'm going to cook him and eat him." Gretel began to cry. The witch smacked her on the head. "Stop your moaning," she croaked. "It will do you no good. Fill the kettle and light the fire in the oven." Gretel did as she was told. The witch made some pastry and slid it into the oven. After a few minutes, she called to Gretel, "Stick your head in the oven and see if the pastry for my Hansel pie is nice and brown." But Gretel was too clever for that. She knew the witch was planning to shut her in the oven and bake her. So she said, "The hole is too small, I can't fit my head in." "You foolish child," cried the old witch. "The hole is not too small. Why, I could fit in myself. Look, I will show you." To prove that the hole was not too small, the witch bent over and stuck her head in the oven. Then Gretel rushed at her and shoved her as hard as she could. She stuffed the witch in the oven and locked it tight. Gretel ran to Hansel and let him out of his cage. "Come, Hansel," she cried. "We are free. The old witch is trapped in the oven." Hansel sprang out and hugged Gretel. Then the 2 of them danced for joy. When there was nothing to fear, Hansel and Gretel went back into the old woman's house. There they found chests filled with golden coins. The witch had kept the money she had stolen from her victims. "These are better than pebbles," chuckled Hansel as he filled his pockets with coins. Gretel smiled and stuffed coins in her apron pocket. When their pockets were filled, the children set off. The children went on until they came to a wide river. "There are no stepping stones," said Hansel, "and we have no boat. How will we get across?" Then Gretel saw something. "Look," she said, "it's a swan. I will ask her for help." So she called out, "Swan, swan, here we stand, Hansel and Gretel on the land. Stepping stones and boat we lack, carry us over on your nice soft back." Lo and behold, the swan came over. Hansel sat on the swan's back. He told Gretel to sit behind him. "No," said Gretel, "that would be too hard on the swan. Let us go across one at a time." And that is what they did. Hansel went across, then Gretel went across. After crossing the river, the children went on for a long while. They walked and walked. At last they came upon a path they knew. They started to run. In a few minutes, they saw their house. They ran as fast as they could. They sprinted through the clearing next to the house and cried out, "Father!" Since he had left the children in the woods, the man had felt sick at heart. As for his wife, well, he had grown disgusted with her cruelty and had kicked her out of the house. When he saw Hansel and Gretel, his face lit up. He ran to them and called out, "My dear children, thank God you are alive! How I have missed you!" Hansel and Gretel hugged their father. He hugged them back. There was something about the way he hugged them. The hug seemed to say that he would never let them go again. As he held Gretel close to him, some of the golden coins fell from her apron. Then, Hansel reached into his pockets and removed his coins as well. "What are these?" said the man. "Coins," said Hansel. "We are rich." So in spite of the wicked stepmother and in spite of the wicked witch, Hansel and Gretel made it back to their home. They lived with their father again. Their troubles were over. They lived in perfect happiness for a long, long time. Like and subscribe to Whoopsie and Whopsie for more stories. Till the next story! Bye-bye!